So, it's been a couple days now that this whole nationwide mess of riots has been going on. And we can see we're definitely at that tipping point where people are tired of the Johnson era police state enforcement tactics that people are just tired of it. I mean, not just yeah, there people need to remember there's two different types of people out in that crowd. Some of the people are just you have people mixing in there that are just there looking to cause trouble and looking to destroy property and looking to use the opportunity to steal and loot and this and that. But they're not the majority. But the majority of people are angry with the whole police state that we live in. Our country has more laws and more ways to put you in a jail cell than even the existing most communist and heavy-handed government in the world, North Korea. It's easier to be thrown in a prison legally in the United States than it is in North Korea. Granted, in North Korea, they don't need laws, but the fact of the matter is that the laws exist. And that's the point. We live in what's supposed to be the freest nation in the world, and it is easier to be thrown in a jail in this country than absolutely any country on the planet that we reside. The whole planet. There is not one single country on this planet that it is easier to be thrown into a prison than the United States. And that in itself is a problem. That, of course, that's Johnson's legacy. A lot of people don't understand that Democratic President Johnson is the one that created most of the situation that we currently live in to undermine everything that he was touting while riding on the coattails of President Kennedy. That's why I have such disdain for President Johnson. That's why I regularly tell people President Johnson is the worst president in American history. And when you look at the country we live in today, whether you agree or not that Johnson was the worst president in American history, my statement is still very strongly founded. Because these laws were created and passed under Johnson at his directive. Johnson was the one that pushed for the creation of the laws that put us in the position we are today. Most people don't know it, but even though Nixon let it go through, a lot of people blame Nixon for the start of SWAT. President Nixon did not create SWAT. President Nixon just didn't veto SWAT. President Johnson created SWAT. President Johnson created the militarization of our police force. President Nixon just let it all go through. Most people don't know that. Most people think President Nixon created all that. President Nixon did not create that. President Johnson created that. And he created that to counterpunch to everything that was the Kennedy legacy that he was forced to let go through so that he could look good. from that point forward, we've lived underneath this progressive regime that has taken over the Liberal Party. That is the big turning point. I mean, there's always been progressives in politics in the United States, and they've always been and continue to be in both parties, posing as either liberals or conservatives. When they're on the conservative side, they're called rhinos. When they're on the liberal side, they're called progressives. Most Americans, including myself, we respect law and order. We respect good cops. Most Americans, like myself, tend to lean to defend those that defend us. But most Americans, like myself, are coming to realize that something is fundamentally broken in the system. Because if I went out in the street, even if I was performing a citizen arrest, even if I was defending children from a monster trying to kill them with a AR-15 or a samurai sword or an axe, whatever, if I got him down on the ground, tied his hands up, and put my knee on his neck and murdered him in front of everybody, I would have been carried away in cuffs. And most Americans agree that would be the right thing to do. And because most Americans agree that that would be the right thing to do, that is what's really fueling the animosity between the general public, both conservatives and liberals, as well as progressives and whatever your party affiliation is, communist, green, alien, it doesn't matter. But most Americans are coming together and agreeing that something is wrong and something is broken and it needs to be changed. I personally would argue that the problem is that we have law enforcement just not being trained properly anymore. There's a place and a need for a militarized police force such as SWAT. The issue is SWAT and the regular police force should be two extremely different entities. Our regular police force should be police like as I remember when I was a kid. That is your regular police force, is your cop who's walking through your neighborhood, your cop who knows everybody, your cop who will walk up and say, "Hey, Peter, you staying out of trouble today?" Or, "Hey, Peter, get over here." You know, they actually know you because they're your neighborhood police force. We don't have a neighborhood police force anymore. The other issue is we have a police force that is now no longer trained to enforce laws, but instead are trained to generate revenue. That's why there's so many issues with police when it comes to traffic stops. When a police officer pulls you over for a taillight being out, the fact of the matter is, and you can go on YouTube, there are plenty of police officers on YouTube that tell you exactly this. When a police officer pulls you over, they are pulling you over to do one of the following things. They are pulling you over to make a drug bust. They are pulling you over to make a DWI bust. Or they are pulling you over to be able to make a confiscation of property under the guise of, what the hell's it called now? They're allowed to take your cash, basically. Or if you're driving around with gold, they're allowed to take your gold, your silver. They're allowed to just say, well, even though we have no proof that you're a drug dealer, it's just not normal for somebody to carry cash, and we're allowed to take it. There's multiple instances that are documented where people are on their way to buy a classic car. And because of how easy it is to make counterfeit checks and how easy it is to be scammed across Craigslist, people make these transactions in cash. So obviously, if you're going to buy a $75,000, $80,000, $100,000, $200,000 classic car, you're going to have that cash with you in a secured manner. So that if you're picking up that, so if you decide, yes, this car is right and this car is worth the money, you can make the transaction and get your car. Or maybe you're trading gold and silver, whatever it is. But there are reasonable reasons for people to carry large amount of cash on them in a society based on cash and capitalism and free market. But in the United States of America, thanks to the laws that were put in place by Johnson, later mistakenly reinforced by President Reagan, you're no longer allowed to carry cash on you in the United States of America. If you're poor or you're a minority in the United States of America, which the minority tend to be poor too. People forget that the majority of Black, Hispanic, American Indian tend to be just as poor as poor white people. And when it comes to being poor, it doesn't matter your race. We all suffer the same injustice. Because the poor is just easy to target. That's another thing that's been proven, when these people through I know what the term is. I just can't grasp it right now. It's on the top of my head, but you'll have someone where, they'll have two dime bags on them. And because they got two dime bags, that makes them a drug dealer. It's not possible that they just bought two dime bags to go home, smoke weed, and play their video games. So, if they got a halfway decent car, maybe it's a Mustang GT, or it's an older Mercedes or BMW or a Lexus, something that they really busted their ass for, the police are allowed to seize their car and just auction it off, and there's nothing they can do because they're poor. And this happens more to someone who's poor than it would happen to the lawyer. And that's the truth. If a lawyer gets busted with 2 bags of coke on him, yeah, he's probably going to jail and his vehicle's going to be impounded. But he's getting arrested and charged with possession of cocaine. He's not being arrested, charged as a drug dealer, no matter what his color is, because he's a lawyer. So he's perceived as somebody of higher stature. And so his vehicle isn't going to be seized and auctioned off as a drug vehicle. Whereas the kid working at McDonald's with 2 dime bags, he's going to be arrested as a drug dealer, arrested for some kind of trafficking charge, if not as a drug dealer. His vehicle will be seized and it will be auctioned off, no matter what his color. White, black, Hispanic, no matter what. And people are just tired of it. The government, under both progressives, under both parties, basically hijacked by the progressives is the issue. But under both parties, these laws have been reinforced. Their reach has been farther stretched. And we don't live in a nation of freedom anymore. We live in a nation of oppression. We live in a police state like you would find in China. We live in a police state with more laws than you can find in North Korea. We live in a country with less freedoms than modern day Russia. I can go to modern day Russia and it is less likely for me to be arrested than just simply walking down the street in the United States as an American citizen. As an American citizen in both countries, it is more likely for me to be arrested walking down the street in the United States of America than it is for me walking the streets of Moscow. If I go to a bar and I get drunk in the United States of America and I do the right thing and I leave my car at the bar and I get on the bus, and even though I'm not being belligerent and rude, if I'm observed stumbling onto the bus in the United States of America, I can be arrested and my whole life can be destroyed for public intoxication because I did the right thing and left my car at the bar and was a responsible adult and took a bus home. In England, I'm allowed to walk down the beach with a beer in my hand. In England, I'm allowed to walk through the streets with a beer in my hand, as long as I'm not being belligerent and obnoxious. England has more freedoms than the United States of America. Everybody likes to talk about how England is so oppressed. You have more freedoms in England than you do in the United States of America. Granted, there are freedoms we have in the United States that don't in England. But it is easier to be arrested in the United States of America than in England. It is easier to be arrested in the United States of America than it is in Iran. You couple all that with what's been going on with the coronavirus and the absolute abuse of power by politicians on both sides, just to be able to say we wield the power and we're going to do whatever we want. I mean, granted, in the beginning, I'll admit, in the beginning, I completely agree with actions that were taken to get this all under control so that our healthcare system wasn't overwhelmed. It was needed, it was a necessity. But when you look at things that are going on in states like Michigan, where you have a governor telling police, directing police to arrest people for planting fruits and vegetables in their garden, how much more social distance can you be? You're planting your fruits and vegetables in your garden so you don't have to be around people. And you have a governor telling police to arrest these people. You have a governor telling police to arrest families going out on their boat, getting away from the masses, and fishing. So this isn't just the police. This is the government doing this and fueling this. And the people that are wielding the most power in these states, in local municipalities, what's happening today is exactly what they want, because they want to use this, just like Johnson did, to get more power for the government. The American people are just tired. We're tired of living in fear. I tell people all the time, I respect police officers because of family and friends that I have that are police officers or were police officers. I respect law and order. We need law and order. But we do not live in a country of law and order. We live in a country of oppression. We live in a country where you have to be afraid to travel and buy a car. I live in Florida. If I want to travel to Michigan because I found a great deal on an 89 M3, I have to be scared to travel from Florida to Michigan to buy that car, because I might have to have cash on me. Most likely I would have cash on me to buy the car. And I have to be scared of police. Why should I be afraid of police? Why should I be afraid police are going to steal my money on the way to do a perfectly legal transaction? But this is the country we live in today. This is the new America. This is the America that both parties, Republican and Democrat, have created. Both parties did this to the United States. Both parties. Not one, both. If I go to a bar, I have to be afraid when I leave the bar. Maybe I only live a block from the bar. So I walk to the bar. I leave my car home and I walk to the bar. And then I wind up meeting up with a bunch of friends. And then we just have one of them nights where we're just having a good time. We're listening to music. We're playing pool. We're playing darts. We're having fun with everybody. We're there till closing. And I stumble my way home, not bothering anybody. I drive a truck for a living. Police come up and arrest me for being a responsible adult and having left my car home and walking to and from the bar a block from my house. My career will be destroyed. I will lose everything I own. I'll be marked as an alcoholic. All for being a responsible adult in what is supposed to be the freest nation in the country. In the world, I mean. We don't live in the land of the free anymore. We live in the land of the oppressed. And yeah, we can argue the semantics about whether or not police have any personal responsibility when it comes to enforcing these laws. But the fact is, they're just like the rest of us. They have a job. Now, like I said, it's obvious something is wrong when somebody can murder somebody in the street and just walk away, and you have to have a mass uprising for them to actually be charged with the crime of murder. Obviously, yes, there is something wrong with that picture, but in general, police are forced to enforce the law. That's their job, to enforce the law. You can't blame the police for your inaction of getting rid of the people that are creating these laws. Too many of you pay no attention at all to politics. You say, oh, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, and you just go and you vote down the party line. You are the reason we are oppressed today. I've been a registered Democrat my whole life. I've voted for Trump. I have voted for Obama. I stood up against Bush 2. I defended Bush 2 against that socialist scourge from Venezuela when he called him the devil. Reagan, Coolidge, and John F. Kennedy are my favorite three presidents. I've voted for Republican mayors and Democratic mayors. I've voted for Republican governors and Democratic governors. And the reason for that is because I don't believe in oppression. And I'm not so misguided that I'm going to believe just because you have a D or an R in front of your name that you represent what that D or R is supposed to mean. Most politicians on both parties do not represent what either of those mean. Because both the D and the R represent true liberalism, constitutionality. That's what liberalism is. Our Constitution is a liberal document. Our Constitution is the most liberal document ever written. our whole country is founded on liberalism. If you do not believe in the freedom for and the freedom from religion, you're not a liberal. You don't believe in the Constitution. If you don't believe somebody can say things that you agree with and you disagree with, and they have the right to do that, you're not a liberal. If you don't believe that people have the right to own firearms and defend their property and defend their personal lives, or tell somebody that you cannot have firearms on my personal property, you don't believe in the Constitution. Therefore, you are not a liberal. That's what liberalism is. True liberalism is complete adherence to the Constitution. It's the belief in the Constitution. Granted, today, because our country is so screwed up, liberals have to make the decision on things that go against what we would believe in, but it's to reverse all the damage that has been done, especially in the last 60 years, by the oppression of two parties, both of which have been ruled by people who do not believe in liberalism. They do not believe in the Constitution. They do not defend the Constitution. Oh yeah, they'll talk a good game when it comes to getting votes, and they'll talk a good game when it comes to the Constitution defending this flavor of the week or that flavor of the week or their personal view on one subject. But when it comes to the Constitution overall, both parties are up there in Washington, D.C., and both parties are mingling in our state capitals, creating laws that are meant to do nothing other than destroy the Constitution. And that brings us to where we are still today. A police officer just should not be allowed to murder somebody in cold blood. That's unconstitutional. That goes against everything the Constitution stands for. It doesn't mean that there aren't times where something will go wrong and somebody will be killed by a police officer while the police officer is in the line of duty defending themselves. But for a police officer to say, guy going like this here, I'm in fear of my life and I had to shoot him. You know what? If something that simple fucking scared you, you should not be a police officer. You're a fucking coward and you don't belong to be a police officer. Now, if someone said I shot him because he's reaching back, that's a different story. Obviously, yeah, he might have a gun behind his back. That's a reasonable explanation. The American population is not fucking stupid. We understand the difference between somebody murdering somebody and somebody defending their life. This does not justify murdering somebody. And it's very easy to weigh that, whether or not that's justifiable. If somebody comes in my house waving their hands like this here and I shoot them, is that considered self-defense? Well, since he has no weapon, no. Now, if it was dark, that's a different story. Like I said, but that's the thing. That's what we understand. The American population understands that sometimes things will happen. And we can wrap our heads around those things. But when you have somebody subdued and handcuffed and then murdered in cold blood on video, the guy was looking at the people recording him. The cop was looking. When you watch the video, he looks directly at them recording him. So he knows he's on video being recorded doing what he's doing. And it's if you're a police officer and you can't understand this, let me ask you this question. If you're a police officer and somehow I subdued you and I put my knee in your neck and murder you, is that first degree murder? Granted, for the police officer, I think the charge should have been second degree murder, but that's another story. But obviously, if you murder a police officer, that's first degree murder. Is that considered first degree murder? I put my knee in your neck and wait until you're unresponsive and it kills you. If you feel that's first degree murder, which, I'm going to give police credit on this because most police, they do agree what happened there is obvious and that the man belongs in jail. And that the man belongs to be charged. So, most police agree with that. But that's the point. Police need to start thinking about the things they're doing and say, well, if a civilian does this, is this a crime? We as civilians give the police more power than we give anybody else because we need to rely on them to uphold law and order. We don't expect them to arrest a news crew live on television and then make a falsified report to file the charges. Now, maybe the falsified report, maybe there was some miscommunication there. But that will be easy enough to figure out down the line. If that's the case, fine. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, there are too many times where we know for a fact that police are lying. Go on YouTube. Go on YouTube and look up seatbelts. Watch how often a police officer will pull somebody over and say, I'm pulling you over because you weren't wearing your seatbelt. Meanwhile, it's all on camera that the person was wearing their seatbelt. And it's not something like the person's wearing a black shirt like I am now with a black seatbelt. They're wearing yellow and white and bright, vibrant colors where that seatbelt is obvious. You cannot miss the seatbelt being across them. It's just the officer doesn't realize that they had it videoed. That's flat out lying. That is flat out, to be honest, because they're temporarily being held, that's false imprisonment. They're being held under a completely false premise. Completely false. Now, like I said, wearing a black shirt with a black seatbelt, okay. We can give a little bit of an argument there. Maybe. We can wrap our head around. But if somebody's wearing a bright, high pink shirt, how can you not see the black seatbelt? You don't belong to be you shouldn't be a police officer if your eyesight is that bad. Or if you're going to be a police officer, you belong behind a desk because I don't want you out in public around my children with a gun in your hand. If your eyesight is that bad, I do not want you in possession in public around my children. And this is why all these riots are happening. Now, I realize the video is a little bit long, but it's not, it's just, I want to stress the point. Because people want change. And we're all ready for change. And so I just want to stress the point that, it's time for change. We need to reverse this course of action that we're on. I mean, after what's happened, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes in the Supreme Court when it comes to how the Supreme Court weighs things in favor of the police anymore. We've already crossed that fundamental threshold. Every American watched on TV or watched on YouTube or have seen clips of a man being murdered in cold blood by a police officer. And then most Americans, if not all Americans, watched reporters being arrested under what appears to be a completely fabricated premise. Like I said, there's a possibility that maybe there was some miscommunication there. But as far as any of us can see, it was a completely falsified report to be able to press charges against them 4 CNN reporters. And I can't believe I'm defending CNN. Of all the people in the world, the fact that I'm defending CNN, that's how horrible that was. So, if you really want change, then you need to demand change when you go to the ballot box this November. And people need to make sure that they register and go to the ballot box this November. And you need to stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution. And you need to start holding government accountable. And there's only one way we're going to hold government accountable. And there's only one way we're going to be able to get the message across to government. And that is when you go into the ballot box or you mail in your ballots, it's time to stop saying, oh, well, I'm a registered Democrat. Or saying, I'm a registered Republican. R. Instead, you need to go in there and you need to look at your ballot if you're mailing it in and just vote for everybody who does not have a D or an R in front of their name. You want to make change in the United States of America? Granted, we might have to pick up the mess afterwards, but you know what? Is it worse than the mess we already live in? Can it be any worse than the oppression that has already been put on us? Because the fact of the matter is, most of the people who are not these and who are not ours are probably going to be constitutionalists. Granted, we might wind up with a communist here and there. Is it worth the risk? I'm willing to go for it. Because they're not all going to be, the majority of them are not even going to be communist. The majority of them are going to be constitutionalists. That I'm willing to bet on. The majority of them will be people who believe in the Constitution. The majority of them will even be people that believe in law and order, but they're going to believe in justifiable law and order. Not criminal law and order, justifiable law and order. So if you really want change, that's how you make the change. That is how you will change what is fundamentally broken in the most oppressed nation on the planet. Because don't fool yourself. We are the most oppressed nation on the planet. We are no longer the nation of the free. We are the nation of the oppressed. Like I said, if you cannot just put $25,000 in a locked briefcase and put it in the backseat of your car and drive up to Michigan or drive out to Salt Lake City or drive anywhere across the country to buy your dream car with no fear at all, then you are not living in a nation of the free. You are living in the nation of the oppressed. When I can put $25,000 in the backseat of my car and drive across this country with absolutely no fear at all, then I am living in the nation of the free. Yeah, I might have to worry about criminals, but that's what I should be afraid of. I should be afraid of criminals. I should not be afraid of the police. I should not be afraid of the government. I should have no worry. Actually, every time I see a police officer, I should be breathing an air of relief because I have $25,000 in the backseat of my car and I'm on my way to buy my dream car. I should not be seeing a police officer and saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, please let me make it. Please let me get my car. Please let me get my car. I should not be doing that. That is oppression. Oppression. Just like what we see in North Korea. Just like we see in Iran. Just like we see in China. That is oppression. Just like we see in any nation that you put your finger on and you say they are oppressed, we are living under that same oppression. We no longer live in the nation of the free. The difference is we have the tools from most of these oppressed countries. The difference is we have the tools to beat the oppression. The question is, how many of you are going to not be cowards and actually go in and use them tools? Because it is. It takes a lot of bravery to go in to a ballot box, especially if you've always your whole life voted all R or all D, which is the majority of Americans. So for the majority of Americans, this is a massive jump and a massive leap of faith. And it takes a massive amount of courage to do something like that because it goes against everything that your mind is telling you to do. When your mind tells you to do something, to do the opposite takes great courage. Whether it's running the opposite way that your brain is telling you to because you're going to save lives, whether it's telling you to stand when your mind is telling you to run because you want to stand for a cause, or when it comes to breaking everything that you've always lived by, when it comes to the ballot box. That takes courage. How many of you have enough courage to do it? How many of you that understand we are living in a nation of the oppressed? And how many of you that keep going out there and talking, oh, we need change, we need change, how many of you are really willing to do it? How many of you are willing to stand where you put your mouth? How many of you are willing to put your money where your words are? Hopefully I'll get home in time so that I can do a mail-in ballot. I should be. And I'm going to be putting my words where my mouth is because I'm not going to be home for the election, but hopefully I'll be home in time so I can do things with a mail-in ballot. And I am. I'm going to vote for every single name that does not have an R or a D in front of it. I've been called a coward my whole life. People just don't know me or understand me. But for those of you that, oh no, I can't do it, you're the cowards. That's cowardice. Because you know our system is broken. And you know we're living under oppression. And you know how to fix it. And you have the tools at your own hand to fix it. Every American can make the change that most of us are demanding right now and calling for. Here's your chance. The election is right around the corner.